The Band of Brothers is a rather clickbait title. Some people would say, why all this hype about the Band of Brothers, as if they won the war or they were some super company above all the others. There are good reasons to do a video on the Band of Brothers. Following their path through Normandy, we'll show some of the real places that were shown in the series, and we can also point out the people they interacted with and people that actually carried out the actions that they were credited with sometimes. Ambrose wrote a great story about real men, and it was turned into a great series seen by millions. The downside is that it does lead some people to think that the Band of Brothers won the war, or that they were some super company. But there were over 70 parachute companies, and they were just part of 155,000 men who came into Normandy on D-Day, followed by 2 million. If you haven't seen this series, I can highly recommend it. Episodes 1, 2 and 3 are relevant to Normandy, and the other episodes are about other parts of Europe. You should remember though that some authors take the attitude that you don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Now if you know a bit about the airborne, you might be wondering why I'm starting at Sainte-Marie, which was the 82nd zone. And of course the Band of Brothers was the easy company of the 506 Regiment, and they were part of the 101st Division, which was not this zone. But Winters and his men, like many paratroopers, were badly misdropped, and they dropped near here. Winters was just over that way. I'm not going to mention what happened in Sainte-Marie because that was covered on my video on the airborne. So subscribe to be kept up with videos. They took off from our pottery in England around 11 p.m. They flew in formations of V's made up of 9 planes, which in turn made up a formation called a serial of up to 45 planes. They flew near the Channel Islands, then crossed the coast of the Cherbourg Peninsula that way, coming this way. As they crossed the coast, a cloud bank caused the plane formations to break up. Once they came out the clouds, the planes were separated. It was only the lead plane of 9 that had the Eureka receiver to pick up the signal sent out by the Rebecca beacons set up by the Pathfinders. Anti-aircraft fire also caused the pilots to speed up. So often instead of doing 100 miles an hour, they're doing 150. Our Winters dropped around here, just outside Sainte-Marie, and the shock of the parachute opening at 150 miles an hour caused him to lose his leg bag and all his equipment. So he landed with no rifle, and there was a fire in town, so the bells were ringing to wake up the population to come to fight it. And the fire also lit up the sky. You could see the silhouette of the church against the light. The paratrooper landed near Winters, and Winters helped him out of his harness and then ordered him to follow him to go and pick up Winters' leg bag with all his equipment. But as they neared where he guessed the leg bag had landed, he saw there was a German machine gun nearby, and so he abandoned the idea. They met Sergeant Lipton, and Lipton actually dropped over that way behind the town hall, which is on the main road leading to Cherbourg. He'd seen a sign for Sainte-Marie, and so they realised they were some way from their drop zone. With Lipton and his men, there were now 12 of them. They walked down this road towards their drop zone. In the HBO series, it was shown as a railway line. There's no railways along here. And they soon met up with a bigger group of men, led by Lieutenant Colonel Cole, of about 70 men. And Lieutenant Colonel Cole had dropped in a rose bush, and he had to cut himself free. And as he moved towards his objective, which was this way, men who'd been lying low in the fields came out to join him. So the group grew quite rapidly. It was at this junction the attack on the horse-drawn convoy happened. In the HBO series, it was shown as a railway bridge going over a road. There's no railway line at all. It was Colonel Cole's men who did most of the action. Winters and his men were behind at the back of the group. Had not much to do with it. The German troops weren't German, but Georgians pressed into service. 40% of the German army in Normandy weren't German. This convoy came from our tea farm, which is down there, and today is a stud farm. PFC Richard Ladd of the 502nd had landed near Sainte-Marie. He'd met up with some 82nd men who were going the other way, so he left them to go eastwards. He met up with Cole's group. Ladd was some way behind the lead troops when he heard shots. The German convoy had been crossing the T-junction, drawing fire from the paratroopers. The action didn't last long. Ladd went over the hedge over there, skirted round to come this way. He saw Lieutenant Pangirl interrogating some prisoners. Farther on he saw a German officer walking towards him. He shouted, "Handy Hock," pointing his carbine at the German. The German carried on till Ladd's muzzle was right in his chest. The German raised his arm and knocked it out of his hands, then ran away. Ladd was walking the same way when he saw two Georgians and the officer coming back towards him. Ladd found a Russian submachine gun on the floor, and luckily it fired, and he cut the three of them down. In this action, Major Vaughan of the 502nd was killed, attacking a machine gun. So Cole instructed the men to empty the wagons so they could use them to pick up any parachute bundles that they met on the way to their objective. Lieutenant Meehan was the leader of Easy Company when they left England. He'd replaced Captain Sobel when the men refused to follow him into combat. Sobel was great for physical training and discipline, but once they went into combat exercises, he got them lost and all killed, as far as the observers were concerned. And so Meehan replaced Sobel. Before Winters jumped, he saw Meehan's plane get hit. The plane started descending, but the landing lights came on. That's the last he saw. There was no news of Meehan after landings. His plane had actually crashed and burst into flames the other side of that field. All the crew and the paratroopers were killed. To this junction, Wint and his men, their objective was straight on, but Cole was going to the left, so Winters decided to keep with him for safety in numbers, so he came down here. So when the group reached this road, the D14, this is where they separated. Lieutenant Colonel Cole's objective was just up there. Colonel Cassidy had his command post there, and Winters and his men went this way. At the junction with the D67, there was this farmhouse. Winters got his men to search it. All they found was a wounded German. They left him there. And later in the day, there were some German bodies found on the road here, and they'd obviously been shot after being taken prisoner. And they were even left there when the tanks came up from Utah Beach. It's reminiscent of what was implicated in the Band of Brothers series. Spears was supposed to have shot some German prisoners after Malarkey had met one that came from Astoria, where he lived. Now, Winters was asked about that, but he couldn't confirm it. He'd heard about it, but things like that happened. We won't even mention this place either, because Winters, he came by it, but he didn't go in it. It was just where General Roosevelt and General Collins spent the night of the 6th. After walking over 8 miles, they got to the Grand Chemin, which is a hamlet not far from Sainte-Marie. They rested a few minutes, and then Winters was called to Captain Hester. And Captain Hester pointed out a hedge. The hedge was just 300 yards away, and he said, "There's fire along that hedgerow, take care of it." That's all the instructions Winters had. The main objective of the 101st was to protect the 4 exits behind Utah Beach. And these guns were firing onto exit number 2, which was the objective for the 506. For more details on the airborne, I've already done a video on that. So subscribe to be kept up to date with new videos. Now, Parachute Company is 130 men. Now, Lieutenant Meehan was the commander of the Easy Company, but he wasn't there, so Lieutenant Winters had to take charge. All he had to attack the gun battery was 12 men. The others were lost at the time. Now, Winters didn't know it, but there was around 50 men manning the gun battery. Now, while the NCOs prepared the men for the attack, Winters went on reconnaissance. He went, the Grand Chemin is down there. He followed the hedge down to where the guns are, and he saw that there were 4 guns connected by a shallow trench about 3 foot deep, protected by machine guns near them and machine guns the other side of the field. He decided the only way to come to success was to use the terrain and take the guns one by one. In the series and the book by Ambrose, the guns are mentioned as 88mm. Allied soldiers saw 88mm and Tigers everywhere. Now, Winters in his book said they were 105mm, which is the correct calibre. They followed the hedge from the Grand Chemin towards the guns. Compton, Garner and Malarkey then crawled across the field to the left to get to a position to throw grenades onto the first gun. Lipton and Rainey went to the right to give covering fire, and Winters and the others attacked between them. The grenades went off just as Winters' attack started. As they approached the first gun, Popeye Wynne got hit in the butt. He apologised to Winters for being hit. One thing that helped their attack to get underway was that the Germans manning the nearest machine gun to them, seeing that they were being attacked from 3 sides, abandoned it and ran across the field. This caused the machine guns on the far side to stop firing for a short time. A German potato masher grenade fell between them. They spread out and splayed on the ground. The grenade went off between Toy's legs. It just made him bounce a bit. The German grenades were handy to throw with their long handle, but not very powerful. Some Germans manning the gun ran away and were shot, and those that resisted were shot. The first gun was taken. Winters had noticed that as they approached the first gun, the machine gun fire across the field slackened, as they didn't want to hit their comrades. He decided to rush the second gun so that the machine guns didn't have time to fire. Running and shouting and throwing grenades, the second gun was taken. In the series, the attack lasts a few minutes. It takes a few minutes for me to recount it, but it actually lasted over 2 hours. Winters had to send a runner back to HQ to ask for more men. He waited half an hour before attacking the third gun, in the same manner with the extra men who had come. 6 Germans came towards them with hands raised. Captain Hester arrived and told Winters that Lieutenant Spear from D Company was mounting an attack on the 4th gun. Garner actually took part in that attack. The attack had cost 4 dead and 6 wounded. The Germans had 15 dead and 12 captured. The others had left towards Brecourt Manor. In one of the gun positions, Winters had found a map of the gun emplacements in the area. He sent that to Battalion HQ. Just after midday, some Shermans turned up from Utah Beach. The machine guns on the far side of the field were still in place. The Shermans went round the far side of the hedge and shot it up to eliminate them. By mid-afternoon, the battery was completely neutralised and the paratroopers approached the manor house. 2 German soldiers came out to surrender, and the son of the family, Michel de Vallevaille, was next to them. He was shot in the back by a paratrooper. He wasn't fatally wounded and taken to England to be treated. He survived and became the mayor of the town. He inaugurated the first museum at Utah Beach, so he didn't bear a grudge about being shot by the Americans. In 2013, I had a man and his 2 grandsons who were going into military academy. I asked permission from Mr. de Vallevaille to go into the field. The day we went, the BBC happened to be there doing a documentary. They had dug along where the trench had been and found an unexploded 75mm shell, obviously from one of the Shermans, as that was the calibre they had, and the German guns were 105mm. The bomb squad had been called in to deal with it. So that was as far as we got. Over 100 bombs are still found every year, and sometimes stashes of hundreds of shells. On the road towards Utah Beach is a statue of Dick Winters. It was put up the year after he died. The statue was placed here along exit number 2. From here we have a great view to Utah Beach, which they protected by knocking out those guns. Winters was awarded the DSC for his action at Brecourt. Winters and his men came down here, past Holdy, and we won't mention Holdy either because Ambrose didn't write about it. But there was actually a gun battery on the other side of that field, and that was captured in an equally valiant attack led by Captain Patch and some misdropped 502 men. More details on that in my video on Sainte-Marie de Mont. The gun battery at Holdy was covering exit number 1, which is the other side of Sainte-Marie de Mont there with its distinctive Renaissance tower. So going past Holdy, they carried on, they came to Couleville, where Colonel Sink had his command post. And that's where they spent the night of the 6th. Now in the HBO series it looks like it's a small town, but in fact it's just a farmhouse. Now on the 6th, the command post was attacked by the Germans. Because they were undermanned, all the men in the command post, even the clerks, had to take up arms to fight off the Germans. And then suddenly the Germans just broke off the attack and went away. Now down there at Iville was the headquarters of General Taylor, commander of the 101st. And just past that is the site of the crash where General Pratt was killed. Actually, one thing that was true that was shown in Saving Private Ryan. On the 7th, they were involved in fighting at Verville. Now, Verville had been taken on the 6th, but the 6th German Parachute Regiment had taken it back again, so they had to fight again to get it. Then they carried on that way towards Carentan, and they were involved in fighting at Longues, which took nearly 3 days of fighting to capture finally. Longues is famous for the church where there were 2 medics, and that's going to be the subject of another video. So subscribe and tap the bell to keep up with new videos. Colonel Sink set up his command post here once they'd taken it, and that photo is him in that doorway having a smoke. The link up with Omaha Beach happened on the 10th of June. Troops had crossed the Douve at Brevin and linked up with the 29th Division coming from Omaha Beach. But Carentan was still held by the Germans, and that was impeding the real link up between Utah and Omaha. The band of brothers going into Carentan were shown in the HBO series, but it didn't show the hard grind carried out by the men of Lieutenant Colonel Cole again to get the outskirts of Carentan. Over the next 2 days, Lieutenant Cole's men fought a hard battle along this causeway. There were 4 bridges, starting with this one, and finally on the 11th they held the outskirts of Carentan. All that is shown in another video, taking Carentan. The final attack on the 12th was to be a 3-pronged attack. The 327th Glider Regiment had crossed the Douve at Brevin, which is that way, along with the 501st. Now the 327th were going to attack Carentan along the main road from Caen and also down the Bassin Flow, while the 501st went to the south of Carentan to take Hill 30. And then the 506 were going to cross the causeway. During the night of the 11th, the 2nd Battalion, 506, started crossing the causeway. And when they got past the 3rd bridge, they turned right down this lane, and there was a maze of paths crossing the floods. After having a hard time getting through the floods from Saint-Côme-du-Mont, the 2nd Battalion, 506, came up here, and they stopped here on the top of this hill some slept. On the morning of the 12th, they started the attack down that way. The attack was going to go ahead down that road into Carentan. The descent into Carentan was pretty well portrayed in the HBO series. They got the road going down, a bit shorter in the film. The house at the end of the street wasn't exactly like that, but similar. Now the E Company was coming down here. Winters sent Lieutenant Welsh forward with some men to attack the machine gun. The other men were in the ditches, both sides of the road, and they froze. The Colonel Strayer was behind them. He could see what was happening. He was shouting to Winters, "Get them moving." So Winters ran from side to side of the road, kicking the men in the pants. Bullets were whizzing around him, but he wasn't hit. Finally, the machine gun, which was firing out the window, was silenced by firing a grenade through it. Then they could go both sides of the junction, and they held the junction. So they had to clear out every house, or check every house. It all took time. Sometimes they'd smash down a door and find civilians taking shelter. Now this turquoise shop is where I believe the aid station was, where Winters was treated, and where he met Bligh, who'd gone blind, and he spoke to him calmly for a few minutes, and Bligh calmed down, and his sight came back, and he went off to join his comrades. Paul Woodage says there was this building on the corner, and then just up here, this building here today is a clinic. It was a private clinic from 1930. As soon as they'd freed the town, they retraced their steps up the road they went down to set up a line of resistance to the west of the town. Thanks to Ultra, they knew that the Germans were going to mount a counterattack from this direction. So there was the 2nd Battalion and the 3rd Battalion in the line, and the 501st were to the left of the 3rd Battalion. So this is the railway line as it was in 1944. Went to Perrières. There's still a railway line in action over there. That goes to Cherbourg, to Paris. Both these railway lines went to Carentan. So the Easy Company were just here. This map shows the start line of the bloody Gulch battle. The Easy Company were here, next to the railway line. And then where those cars are in the distance is the road that goes to Deauville. F Company was there. The other side of O was D Company. It's all been obliterated by this industrial complex. So it's not as appealing as the other site proposed. But this is the consensus opinion now, that it started here. Some people maintain that this was the start line for the bloody Gulch battle. There's the railway line here. The Easy Company were up against the railway line. This does have the appeal of not being obliterated by an industrial complex. I think the consensus now is that the start line was where we were before. But there would have been fighting across here anyway. During the night of the 12th, the Germans are calling out, they're firing sometimes. The men tried to get some sleep. Sergeant Talbot had borrowed an overcoat from a dead German. They went along the lines, checking on the men, and then he tapped on the shoulder of Private George Smith, because it was his turn to take some guard duty. And Smith woke up and saw this silhouette of a German leaning over him, and he stabbed Talbot. Now Talbot survived and recovered, but he was out of the fight. The battle started at 5:30, with both sides giving continuous fire in the utmost confusion. At one point, Company F, being attacked by self-propelled guns, they broke the line and retreated, and that left Company D on their left and Company E on their right, with their flanks exposed. So then Company D retreated, leaving Company E the only company in the line. Thankfully, the F and D companies rallied and came back. Welsh saw a German tank coming from the direction of where Company F should have been. He took Sergeant McGrath with him and a bazooka, and they set the bazooka, fired it at the tank, and it missed. The tank fired at them, but the shell went over their heads because the tank was coming over a hedge and it couldn't get the gun down far enough. McGrath got off a second shot with the bazooka and he got it right in the underbelly of the tank. Now, the Germans had self-propelled guns and tanks. They believed they were up against infantry, but thanks to the ultra intercept, that incited General Bradley to dispatch the 2nd Armored Division in haste towards Carentan. Around about 2 in the afternoon, the Shermans turned up, and that swayed the battle in the favour of the Americans. So D Company was there, where there's now another industrial building. And the other side of the Orville Road was the 3rd Battalion, and that's been left untouched. There's a sunken lane in between 2 hedges. So along here was the start line for the 3rd Battalion. Now they called it the Battle of Bloody Gully. The 2nd Battalion called it the Battle of Bloody Gulch. Same battle, not exactly the same lines, at the same time. Now if you haven't heard of Pee Wee Martin, you should look him up. He's a famous veteran. And last year, 2019, I was guiding somebody around here, and his uncle was killed in the Battle of Bloody Gully. And Pee Wee Martin was just 5 yards from his uncle when he died. And the man I was showing around had talked to Pee Wee Martin, and with the explanations he gave him, we found the place where his uncle died, which is just the other side of that hedge line over there. And Donald Burgett wrote a very good book called Curragh. Now he wasn't Easy Company, he wasn't even 2nd Battalion, he was 1st Battalion, 8 Company. He landed 15 miles away from where he should have been, at Meehan. During the Battle of Bloody Gulch, Company A was in reserve, but Burgett was separated from his unit and he was looking for them, and he came into this field here, and he was just coming out of it, and a mortar fell near him and blew him into the ditch. Now he was badly wounded, and he would have died, except luckily a jeep came along with a medic, and he picked him up and took him to the aid station near Sainte-Marie. So this is a field he says he was wounded in. After all this hectic action, the 101st were in a defensive position to the southwest of Carentan, over that way, for a few weeks. And then in July they went back to England to prepare for the next mission, which was going to be Market Garden. Hello.